One of the core benefits of After Effects is animation, and to do this, we use keyframes. A keyframe simply defines a point in space, and when you position these on the timeline, then After Effects knows what to do as it moves between keyframes, a process called tweening. What it will do is create an animation. For example, if you set something here, and you tell it has 2 seconds, it'll move. Let's take a quick look. So here I have an animated logo. It was an Illustrator file that was brought in, and you can see just a simple animation. Well, why don't we try this ourselves? We'll go to the Animate tab here, and you'll see that the layers are already staggered. And what we want to do is create a basic animation. So I'll select this first layer and click to go to the 2-second mark. And what I'll do here is add a keyframe for position and rotation. Now what we can do is come to the beginning and slide this off. If I hold down the Shift key, it animates a bit further. And we'll rotate it a little bit. Now you see it comes into play and lands. Well, that worked out nicely. Let's compare that here to the beginning one. Here we did it with a 1-second move. So that's fine. I'll just move things up. So we can come to the 1-second mark, checking our timing, grab the keyframes, lassoing them both, and drag them down while holding the Shift key. And you see it snaps into place. Well, let's apply the same sort of movement. I can now select these and choose Edit, Copy. Now I'll select the next layer, press the I key to jump to the endpoint, and paste. You see the keyframes are added. Third layer, I key for endpoint, paste. Let's have a look. Now, that almost worked, but I want to point out the problem. Look at how the animation moved everything to the same place. Well, that's problematic. Let's undo here for a second. And now pay closer attention. So what we want here is that the starting position is going to change. So I'll add position and rotation. And then I'll go forward plus 1 second. In this case, let's add keyframes here for the end position. Now we can go to the beginning of the layer for the, slide it off to the right, and put a little rotation on it like the others. Looks like we were starting with about 60 degrees. So we'll do a similar rotation on this one. Click to navigate to the keyframe, type in 60 degrees, and there's the. Well, that's great. Now let's do the same thing for the last layer here. I for endpoint, turn on the stopwatch for position and rotation so it memorizes things, and then click on the time and type +100 for 1 second. We'll add new keyframes, jump back here, rotate 60 degrees, and slide that first one off a little bit. Let's have a look. Comes on, see the difference, and snaps into place. All right, that's working quite well. We've got the basics of animation there, but we're going to want to refine this a little bit just to get it to be a little bit smoother. Let's keep going. While basic animation just uses keyframes, we can refine those keyframes to make things look more professional or more organic. Rather than just snapping into place, we can apply ease, which applies a gentle slow or start motion to make things feel a bit more natural. Here I've got the velocity changed, and watch how it comes in. I like that. We're getting a little bit of a spin, and it snaps into place, where there's a little bit of slowdown at the very end there. We can see this by selecting a layer and looking at the velocity graph and taking a look at the property. Notice how this is no longer a straight line. Rather, it has some ease, and that creates gentle motion. Okay, looking at these here, we're going to play with it. I can have different types of movement. Let's go here to the start. And in this case, we've got our basic effect. It's coming into play. But what I want to do is add a little bit more motion. So you can see that we added an extra spin here, 2 full rotations. So let's select this first one here. There's our frame, and double click, and I'll add 2 full revolutions. Then I can do the same here. Click, 2 revolutions, and double click, making sure we're looking at the rotation property here. There it is. And 2 full revolutions. Let's have a look. Good. I like how that's coming. And that's snapping into place. Now I want to point out, you'll notice that the rotations are happening in certain places. For example, if I look at this first word C, you could see the anchor point there is currently in the middle of the E. If I come up here and grab the pan behind tool, I can move that, for example, and change where it's placed. Now, in order to do this, you'll want to select the individual keyframes when you do it. So, for example, I can slide that like such and place it at the tip of the S. And now you see it's rotating around the S. Now, I like the other ones. I want to point out here, this is rotating around the exclamation point, which is kind of a cool effect. The pan behind tool is useful if you want to tweak where the anchor point is. Remember, the anchor point is the hinge for the animation, like a shoulder or a wrist, where the movement emanates from. All right, this is looking really good, but we want to tweak this now. So what we're going to do is select these here and right click, and we can choose Keyframe Assistant. I'm going to tell it to ease in, and it creates a change in shape. If we look at the velocity graph there, we can see that. Here's the rotation property and the position property. Let's watch that. That's pretty cool. We'll do the same thing here on the others. Exit the velocity graph, select Keyframe Assistant, ease in. And let's choose these. Keyframe Assistant, ease in. Well, that's a slightly different shape, so let's look at that. There, you see it doesn't affect the start as much, just the end. It's coming to a gradual stop. I like that. It's coming into place and landing. So let's select these here and change the shape. We'll go to ease in. Notice it didn't change because it was already applied. So I can command click on them to revert them back, and now try ease in. And you see that the shapes are matching. All right, let's have a look. So far, so good. We're off to a great start of an animation. Let's go ahead and fit this in place. And what's feeling really nice here is just the need to make it feel a bit more natural or organic. So let's revisit motion blur. Motion blur creates a sense of natural movement, the feeling that something is blurring photorealistically. Here I've got the end state of blur. And I like that. Notice how the blur is stronger at the edges here because it's moving faster. Since it's spinning around the exclamation point, that doesn't have as much blur. But the part at the end where it's whipping around, that's moving a lot faster, covering more ground. Plus, once something lands, the blur stops. This isn't an effect. This is actually calculated using real-world physics. All right, let's start with the blur comp here and have a look. Remember, motion blur is a global switch. So you come down here to your timeline, and you need to enable frame blending and motion blur. Now, frame blending is useful when you're working with footage. In this case, it's just static items. There's no frames. So I'll go over to just motion blur, and that's going to create a nice effect. If we take a look at this here, you might be wondering, where is it? Well, that's because not only do you need to enable it globally, you need to come down here where it says toggle switches and modes. Click that to view each of the individual layers. and now enable this like so. You notice the motion blur kicks into place. Now as the items spin, they pick up a photorealistic blur. If you want to control that effect, you can go to your composition settings. Normally here under the Advanced tab, you'll find the shutter angle. 180 degrees is the default, but you can go up to 720 degrees. More shutter angle equals more photorealistic blur. Let's drop this to 180 for a moment and drag through. You see the blur is a lot less, but it is natural. I actually liked it being a little bit more exaggerated though, so I'll go to the composition settings, back under Advanced, and increase that to 360. There we go. All right, I like that. Let's go back up here to the composition settings and Advanced and take that to 360. All right, there we go. That feels realistic. And I like how the elements come in and land. All right, let's explore just a few more tweaks to these keyframes. Okay, let's take this and finish this out. We're going to add a little bit more to this animation, working in 3D space and adding an effect. Here's the end state. If you take a look at it, you'll see there's a light effect and the objects are spinning in three-dimensional space. Well, that significantly adds to the quality of this effect, making it a much more almost cinematic feeling. Let's start here with Modify. I'll open these up so you can see things. First up, let's go to the effects and just turn them off. I just want to focus on the 3D position to start. Here, if we look at each property, I can press U to see the user added keyframes. I want to point out something. Instead of this just being 2 dimensions, we now have a third dimension. That's Z space. So X moves side to side, Y moves up and down, and Z moves in and out. This works pretty easily and creates a more realistic looking animation. In this case, we rotated the object some and scaled it up quite a bit. Notice there the Z rotation of 180 degrees. Also, be sure the continuously rasterized switch is flipped so that the object scales cleanly. Here, it rotates in and lands. And that's what the others are doing. U for user added keyframes. You'll see this one starts spun 270 degrees. And the last one here for difference, not quite as much, but is starting with its own rotation there of about 90 degrees. And so if you look at those, you'll see how they spin and land, creating an interesting three-dimensional effect. Also, look at that motion blur. Remember, the anchor point here is controlling the place that it's orienting from, so the object moving more quickly is at the edge. Now, to finish this off, I took advantage of an effect. It's a real straightforward one. Let's go ahead and just enable the first layer here, and I'll twirl down the radial fast blur and click the effect switch. Here you see the glow. What's happening is the glow starts with an amount of 100. That's the max. And then when it lands, it fades to 30, and then slowly over time back to 0. I've also told it to not just zoom everything. See, that's not as effective. Versus zooming just the brightest areas creates a cooler effect. We get a light effect. That is then applied to all 3 layers. So here's the radial fast blur. And down here, let's just enable the switch, the radial fast blur. What we're getting is a sense of glow. So as that animation plays out, you see that the light effect works across. There we go. So from a pretty straightforward animation to one that's a little more complex, I invite you to just open up this project and explore it, but you'll see that it's just building upon the skills you've already learned. Taking advantage of scale and Z-space, as well as an effect over time, can really make something go from a straightforward animation to one that's almost cinematic, like a logo treatment.